$15,000, a forged signature, and hundreds of calls. The family drama that almost destroyed me. Have you ever heard a phone ring so often that every buzz feels like the stab of a knife? Mine started ringing a couple of weeks after my wife's funeral. At first it was caring, "Dad, how are you holding up?" A day later the request for money began. Then more and then more. At first I thought my son just needed help. Then I understood the terrible truth. The calls weren't for connection. They were for money. And the more I gave, the more they took. Until the day I received a letter that completely turned my life upside down. Would you be able to recognize the moment when love turns into manipulation? The last days before the funeral passed as if in a dream, but the day of the funeral itself felt as if someone had slowed down the tape. I remember the smell of flowers in the hallway, that old photograph on the mantelpiece, and the silence that remained after Bill, a silence I didn't know how to accept at first. The days stretched on strangely. Tea in my mug grew cold, the newspaper lay unread, and the clock on the wall ticked too loudly. I was alone. Terribly alone. 2 weeks after the funeral, Mike called, my son. I picked up the receiver and felt a wave of relief. The voice of a living person on the phone was like a light in a dark room. He spoke carefully, as if approaching a cracked vessel. "Dad, how are you? Are you holding up?" "I'm holding on," I replied, and that was both the truth and not the truth at the same time. We talked about the funeral, about the emptiness in the house, about how strange it was not to hear the rustle of Bill's newspaper in the mornings. As I listened, I could feel a current of care flowing from the other end of the line. 3 days later, Mike called again. First, it was conversation, half-tones, memories. But right before saying goodbye, he said, "Dad, by the way, we've got a bit of a situation with work. A temporary delay with the paycheck. Could you possibly lend us a couple of thousand until next week? We'll pay you back for sure. I promise." I can't recall what exactly motivated me at that moment. Pity, habit, a father's duty. I agreed. $2,000 left my account that same day. My son. It's only natural to help, I thought. A week passed and the call repeated. "Dad, the odometer broke on the car. We need money for repairs or we can't get to work." Alright, I thought. I transferred $800. 3 days later, another call, the pediatric clinic. "Sorry, the insurance didn't cover everything." My patience was like magnetic tape, stretching thinner and thinner. I began to feel a faint irritation, but I explained it to myself. He's young, he's in a tough spot. I repeated it like a mantra because I didn't want to see what was beginning to show between the lines. Then the calls became daily. Sometimes 3 or 4 a day. First it was Mike, then his wife Lena. Sometimes both at once. I started noting the times. Morning, lunch, evening. Once the phone rang at 2 in the morning. Mike's number. I didn't answer, but I was awake. A question spun in my head. What is it this time? The next morning, a printout of the transfers lay on the table. Small sums, but constant. I began to notice inconsistencies. On their social media pages, photos from a recent vacation flashed, wine, beach, while my transfers were for urgent expenses. The moment of inner discomfort wasn't a single blow, but a series of rustlings under the door of my peace. I remembered how Bill always used to say, "Family isn't just about pockets, sir." But my fingers memorized every bank notification and my heart, every call. I started catching myself thinking that Mike wasn't calling for the warmth of my voice, but for gain. It felt like a small betrayal, not a brazen theft, but a habit. They had grown used to Dad saving the day. I felt irritation and shame simultaneously. Irritation at being used and shame for allowing it to happen. One evening, Mike came over to the house, ostensibly just to drop by, see how you're doing. He sat opposite me on the sofa and spoke in a tone he used to use when asking for advice. At one point he said outright, "Dad, you know we're going through a rough patch right now. You wouldn't leave your son in a bind, would you?" His eyes were attentive, his voice soft. I saw how carefully the script was constructed. Pity plus obligation. And then something clicked inside me. It wasn't anger, not rage, more of an awakening. What if he's calling not because he's in trouble, but because it's profitable for him to call? Nevertheless, I said, "All right, I'll help, but let's formalize it, and I owe you a repayment plan." Mike was embarrassed. "Yeah, of course, Dad. Whatever you say." He picked up his phone, muttering that no one likes paperwork, but he agreed. I saw a duality in this. On one hand, it was a chance to keep the situation under control. On the other, it was the first line of defense I was putting up around myself. That evening after he left, I sat down at the table and wrote down all the sums, dates, and conversations in a notebook. I had started keeping accounts. And this is what I felt then. not relief but wariness. There was something mechanical in this calling rhythm, like a clock ticking off not time but a tally. Each subsequent call reminded me more and more, you are their bank, not their father. And in that moment, I understood that the story was only just beginning. Who would make the first move, them or me? At first, I thought the calls were just a temporary weakness, a moment when the young ones were struggling. But weeks turned into months and every new call sounded the same. Always a worried voice, excuses, phrases spoken on an inhale. Dad, we've got it under control, it's just, the car broke down again, the damn transmission. We just need a couple hundred. 3 days would pass and again. Dad, the kindergarten raised its fees and Lena's sick, she needs expensive medicine, we'll pay you back honestly. At first, I just transferred the money. It even felt good to feel that I was still needed, that they were turning to me. After my wife's death, I felt an emptiness, and these calls temporarily filled it. But gradually they changed, they weren't a request anymore but a habit. They no longer called with "Can you help?" but with "Please transfer." The intonation had changed. Instead of gratitude, there was a business-like tone, as if it were an accounting operation. Sometimes they called right in the middle of my work meeting. I still did some consulting work for my old company, and every call broke my train of thought. Once the phone rang 5 times in a row, I thought something terrible had happened. When I finally answered, I only heard, "Dad, can't you just transfer it now? We're in line at the bank and you're stalling again." I froze. A line at the bank? What are you doing at the bank? I asked. "Oh, it's nothing," Lena replied. "We just need to transfer something. You don't want us to get evicted, do you?" That was the first time I felt irritation instead of pity. Not because they were asking, but because it had become a demand. I tried to explain. "Mike, I don't mind helping, but you have to start planning. Money doesn't grow on trees. Let me help you make a budget, sort out your expenses." He sighed heavily, irritably. "Dad, don't start. You said yourself that family should help each other. Isn't this the same thing?" "I didn't apply for anything," I said. Pause. "Your address and phone number are listed. Are you sure?" I was sure. The next day, another call from a different bank. The same story. I gathered my documents and called Mike. "Mike, did you apply for a loan somewhere using my name?" He hesitated, coughed. "Dad, come on, for God's sake, it's just a mistake. The bank mixed everything up." "A mistake with my address and my phone number?" "Relax, don't be so dramatic. We were just inquiring, we didn't sign anything." I felt my stomach clench. Just inquiring. And in that moment, I understood. It wasn't just the calls that were the problem anymore. The problem was the very fact that I had ceased to be a person to them. I had become a resource. That evening, I sat in the kitchen for a long time, staring at the phone as if it were a weapon pointed at me. It lay there, silent, but I knew it would ring again. And I would hear that same voice again, tired, pressing, familiar. I tried one last time to talk to him like a human being. "Mike, son, I don't want to fight, but you have to understand, I can't keep giving. It's not right. I can help with advice, with contacts, with anything, but not with money." The reply was cold, almost formal. "What, you don't trust your own family? Trust isn't measured in money. So, you just want us to drown in debt, is that it?" After that conversation, for the first time, I hung up without saying goodbye. But the silence didn't last long. 2 days later, a letter arrived from the bank. "Your loan application has been denied." I sat with that piece of paper and felt the chasm widening between me and my son. That evening, the phone rang 6 times. I didn't pick up. On the 7th ring, a message came. "If you don't want to help, just say so. But don't make us out to be criminals." I smirked. Then who else applies for loans in someone else's name? I opened my notebook, the very one I'd started after the funeral, recording sums and dates. Now I added a new page. October 1st, calls from the bank. Possible fraud. Check documents. Inside, I felt no anger, no pain. Only clarity. I understood that things had gone too far. That everything which had started with the phrase, "Dad, help," had turned into a web of manipulation and lies. And deep within that web, I was the only one who was still silent. After that conversation, I truly decided to step back. I thought, maybe time would cool everyone down. For 1 week, I didn't answer any calls. For the second, I only replied with short texts. Asterisk, "I'm fine, just tired." Asterisk. But the silence didn't sit well with them. At the end of the 3rd week, Lena called. I didn't want to pick up, but there was something hysterical in her voice on the voicemail, so I finally hit accept. "Dad, please just hear me out," she began immediately, no greeting. "We can't manage." If you don't help us now, we'll be evicted. Just thrown out. Lena, I said calmly, we've already discussed this. Discussed what? She cut me off. You have a house, you live alone. We're your family. Why are you acting like we're strangers? She was crying, but the tears sounded rehearsed, the kind used to pressure you to guilt trip. I felt like I was under a spotlight. Every word was a needle prick. Lena, I said quietly, I've helped you more than I should have. If you can't live without a constant flow of money, then the problem isn't circumstances. It's a habit. The reply was a sharp intake of breath, followed by the blunt tone of the dial tone. The silence returned. A few days later, a letter arrived from the bank. I opened the envelope and froze. We confirm receipt of your signature on the loan agreement dated October 12. I read the line 3 times. The signature, it was mine. Only I hadn't put it there. My hands trembled. For a moment, I wasn't sure if I was even breathing. How could they? I sank to the floor right where I stood, the letter in my hand. Somewhere in the distance, a clock was ticking, each click sounding like a verdict. Not anger, no. A coldness, as if everything inside me had frozen solid. An hour later, I was standing by the desk, sifting through all my documents. Passport, tax papers, old receipts. I was searching for anything that could explain that signature. I found a folder with copies, and there, on one of the forms, was my old signature from when I'd taken out an insurance policy months ago. The very one they'd seen when I showed them my documents. So that's where. They'd just copied it. I sat back down, and for the first time in a long while I felt, not pain, not rage, but clarity. They had crossed a line. This was no longer about requests. This was forgery. A crime. The phone rang again. My son's name flashed on the screen. I watched it for a long time, not answering. When the ringing stopped, a message came through. Dad, it's just a technical error. Don't you dare panic, we'll sort it out. With a forged signature. In my name. I remained silent. I didn't call back. The next morning, I went to see my old friend Tom. He used to be an accountant for a big firm. Now he advises retirees on taxes. Tom was one of the few who stayed around after my wife died. I showed him the papers, told him everything. He listened in silence, then took off his glasses, polished them, and said, "You realize this is a criminal case?" "Yes, I do. And we're not just talking about money, but document forgery. If the bank proves you knew about it, you're the one who'll take the fall." I nodded. Tom looked at me intently. "Want my advice? Don't act in haste. Gather everything, copies of letters, call logs, transfers. We need to prove you were the victim, not a participant." We worked until evening. He helped me outline the next steps. 1. Request a copy of the contract with the signature from the bank. 2. Check what accounts were recently opened in my name. 3. Save all messages from Mike and Lena. 4. Avoid direct confrontation with them for now. He emphasized that last point. Let them think you haven't figured it out. It'll buy you time. That evening, I returned home and for the first time in ages, turned on the answering machine. There were 7 messages. First Lena, then Mike, then Lena again, voices trembling, tears, accusations, self-pity. "You've got it all wrong, Dad. We were just trying to pay off the debts faster. If you don't help now, everything will fall apart." I listened, feeling nothing. They didn't even know everything had already fallen apart. Then I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down to take notes. Date, time, the content of the call. Everything. Their words, verbatim, on a sheet of paper. "Dad, you don't want us on the street, do you? Dad, it's just a signature we were going to tell you." I wrote for a long time, methodically, as if gathering evidence, not against them but against my own naivety. At some point a thought struck me. What if I had never noticed the letter? They would have just processed everything and then said, "Dad, don't worry, we'll make the payments on time." And I would have believed them. Like always, Tom called in the evening. I spoke with a lawyer. Better not to go to the police just yet. Let's wait and see what they do next. They might dig themselves in deeper. "You think they'll risk it?" "No," he said. "I think you've earned the right to let the truth catch up with them on its own." For the first time in weeks I smiled. "So we observe." Exactly. That night I slept peacefully, because for the first time in a long time I had a plan. Not shouting, not hysterics. A plan. And inside, a strange, cold satisfaction. If they've decided to play this game, then let them see how adults play. Sometimes I wonder, maybe it was at that moment that something inside me broke. Or perhaps, on the contrary, it was fixed. Because when the people you love decide to deceive you for their own gain, only one thing remains: the truth, and the cold resolve to see it through to the end. The following weeks dissolved into a monotonous rhythm of phone calls, paperwork, and silence. I did everything exactly as Tom had instructed. Methodically, without emotion. Every transfer, every call, every message, I saved it all. At first I felt like a traitor. After all, he was my son. But that feeling was soon replaced by another. The understanding that I wasn't protecting myself, I was protecting my name. 2 weeks later, Tom introduced me to a lawyer, a woman named Sarah Lawson. Petite, severe, with a piercing gaze and a voice utterly devoid of pity. "So, they forged the signature," she stated, scanning the documents, "and used your number, address, probably some of your data from old documents?" "Yes," I replied. "They'd seen a copy of my signature a couple of months ago." "Classic," she nodded. "Family fraud is one of the dirtiest kinds, because you don't just lose money, you lose respect." I nodded silently. Sarah opened a notepad. "Look, Mr. Hartley, we have 2 paths. The first is quiet. We write to the bank, prove the forgery, close the loan, and file a civil suit against them. The second is criminal. Police, court, proceedings. It could destroy everything that's left between you." I was silent for a long time, then said, "They already destroyed it." She looked me straight in the eye and smiled for the first time. "Then we go all the way." From that day on, everything gained momentum like a snowball rolling downhill. The lawyer gathered all the documents, requested call logs, correspondence, financial records. Tom helped piece together a timeline, from the first transfer to the moment I received the letter from the bank. We even found a printout from the bank's security camera. It clearly showed Lena handing the documents to the manager. "This will be key," Sarah said. "Without this, proving intent is difficult." She worked like a surgeon, precise, without a single unnecessary word. Every document was like an instrument. I was astonished by how cold and systematic it all looked. Sometimes I wanted to snap, to call Mike and just scream, "Why? Why did you do this?" But Sarah had warned me. "Any word from you, even an emotional one, can be used against you. You must remain silent. Let them do the talking." And they talked. At first, softly, politely. Then with threats. "Dad, what are you doing?" Mike would say. "We're family. How can you drag us through the legal system? Dad, if this goes to court, you'll destroy us." Lena sobbed. I remained silent. I recorded every call they made. I forwarded every message to Sarah. She would just nod. "Perfect. Let them continue. They're digging their own grave." 3 months later, the case went to court. The bank acknowledged the forgery but demanded an official confirmation of my innocence from my side. I remember that morning. The courtroom, small, located in a suburb. Gray walls, the smell of coffee and paper. I sat on the bench. Across from me were Mike and Lena. She was crying. He stared at the floor, hands in his pockets, fists clenched. When the judge entered, I felt my heart skip a beat. Case number 4827. Hartley versus Hartley. Charges: document forgery, loan fraud. My lawyer stood up and presented the evidence. Call recordings. Printouts of correspondence. A copy of the contract with the forged signature. The bank's security footage. The judge listened in silence. Lena whimpered. Mike avoided my gaze. When it was their turn to speak, Mike stood up. "Your Honor, this is all a mistake. We never meant to deceive anyone. We wanted to help ourselves and thought Dad wouldn't mind." I listened and felt something inside me snap. Wouldn't mind? Forging a signature and taking out a $15,000 loan, and that was just, thought he wouldn't mind? Sarah requested the floor. "Your Honor, the defendants didn't just think. They contacted the bank on 3 separate occasions, used the plaintiff's personal data, and knowingly misled the institution. This is documented." Mike tried to object, but the judge raised his hand. "Enough." Silence. Only the rustling of papers. And that sound, like a distant echo of everything I had lost. After the hearing, Sarah came over to me. "This is just the first hearing. They might offer a settlement. And if they don't? Then the court will pass a verdict. They're facing a suspended sentence, a fine, and the loan will be annulled." I said nothing. I wanted it all to be over, but not for revenge. I just never wanted to hear them say my name with such fake sympathy again. At the second hearing, a month later, the judge requested additional evidence. Tom testified, confirming that I had come to him immediately after receiving the letter. "He was in shock," Tom said. "I've known this man for 30 years. He isn't capable of telling Alyachev, let alone secretly taking out a loan. Lena cried again. I sat, looking at my son, and for the first time noticed, he wasn't avoiding my gaze out of guilt, but out of pride. He simply couldn't accept that he'd been caught. After the hearing, Sarah said, "We're almost done. We just have to wait for the court's decision. But I believe the outcome is clear." I asked, "Why don't I feel any better?" She looked at me carefully. "Because you aren't seeking revenge. You are simply defending yourself. And defense rarely brings satisfaction." That evening, I returned home. The phone lay on the table. Silent. The silence I had once feared now felt like salvation. I sat by the window, turned on the desk lamp, and looked once more at the letter from the bank. The one with the forged signature. Now it lay in a folder labeled Evidence. I ran my finger over my own name. Asterisk, they didn't steal the money. They stole the trust. Asterisk. But the trial was already in motion. And I knew the truth was on my side. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the calm before the court's verdict. A moment when everything hinged on a single signature, this time a real one. And I already knew that if I had to, I would sign everything required, but now only by my own hand. The court delivered its verdict a month after the final hearing. I remember the day as if filmed in slow motion. Sunlight broke through the clouds, reflecting off the gray courthouse walls, and I sat on the very bench that now felt not like a place of punishment, but a place where justice was being restored. First, the bank's decision was announced. The loan was annulled, all obligations removed from my name. I let out a restrained sigh, but that was only the beginning. In light of document forgery and fraud, the judge read, the defendants are ordered to repay the full loan amount, including interest and penalties. Additionally, Lena and Mike are to pay compensation for the moral damages inflicted upon the plaintiff. I felt my heart slow its rhythm. Not from anger, not from joy, but from that strange mix of relief and calm one feels when truth has prevailed. Mike looked at me. His eyes, usually full of manipulation and confidence, were now empty. Lena was silent too. She was sobbing, but not from grief. It was from the realization that the game they had been playing had ended in their defeat. Sarah Lawson approached me quietly. "Excellent, Mr. Hartley. Everything went according to plan." She smiled faintly at the corners of her mouth. "And I think you can breathe easy now." I nodded. But their words, their calls, their messages still echoed in my head. "Dad, you don't want us to end up on the street, do you?" I understood now. They never wanted help. They wanted control. They wanted to test the boundaries. Their dad bank had been a convenient resource for them. I didn't say a word as I left the courthouse. I simply walked down the street, feeling the sun's rays on my face and the silence that was no longer frightening. Every tree, every whisper of the wind seemed like a reminder. Life goes on, and no one can dictate the rules of the game to me anymore. A day later, I decided to take a symbolic step. I changed my phone number. A new number, a new phone. On the answering machine, I left one short message meant to close this chapter once and for all. "If you're calling to borrow money, you've dialed the wrong number." I listened to that message and there was no anger in it, only calm. Only the realization that my life now belonged to me. Mike and Lena, of course, tried to find me. For the first few days they called the old number, left texts, letters. I didn't read any of them. But the strangest thing was the internal shift. I used to think that love for one's children meant unconditional trust, a willingness to help at any moment. Now I understood, a parent's love shouldn't be blind. If love allows for manipulation, exploitation, and deceit, it's no longer love but a habit. That evening, I sat in my armchair by the fireplace, holding a cup of tea, and for the first time in months, I allowed myself to just breathe. I opened an old notebook that Bill had always kept on his shelf. Those very notes about life, about honesty, about the importance of remaining human even when the world is crumbling around you. My gaze fell on a photograph from our last family outing. I remembered Bill's smile, his calm face, his hand on my shoulder. And I understood. My victory wasn't in their punishment, not in the money, not in the legal success. My victory was in remaining true to myself. I didn't descend into anger, revenge, or screaming. I simply restored justice. The following days were quiet. The phone was silent. Letters were returned to sender. I started reading the newspaper again, putting the kettle on, going out into the garden. Sometimes I caught myself thinking, will they ever understand? But it didn't matter. What mattered was that I understood. What mattered was that I no longer allowed myself to be used. Sometimes, when thoughts of the past surfaced, I would smile. "Well, Mike, Lena," I would say quietly to myself, "life teaches its lessons. And you know what? Sometimes the best lesson is to simply lose your convenience and see the truth. I remembered all the calls that used to wake me up at night. Now I knew, no call would ever dictate my life again. No plea, no tear, no guilt trip. Silence. I took a sip of tea, and for the first time in many months I felt that my home was truly my home. Without pressure, without expectations, without fake concern. And somewhere deep inside, I understood that this feeling, this was the truest moral victory. Several weeks had passed since the court's decision. The phone remained silent. The answering machine with my new number was still on, and for the first time in many months I felt a sense of peace. I had almost forgotten that every call used to be an alarm bell, every message a threat, and every request a test of my patience. But the past found a way to remind me of itself. One evening there was a quiet knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. On the doorstep stood Mike and Lena. Lena was crying and Mike held an envelope in his hands. His eyes held a mixture of shame and fear. "Dad," Mike began, but I raised my hand. "Sit down," I said calmly. "First, tell me everything." They stepped over the threshold as if entering a stranger's house. And to me it was a stranger's house now. A house where there was no longer any room for manipulation. Lena couldn't finish, choking on a sob. "We don't know how to fix this." "Start by telling the truth," I said. "All of it." Mike sighed and I noticed his shoulders slump. "We tried to take out a loan in your name. At first we thought you'd just agree. Then we realized we needed a signature. And we forged it." The word "forged" echoed in the room like thunder. Lena's tears, her trembling voice, it all seemed like theater, but I saw in their eyes not a performance but genuine fear. "Did you understand you could lose everything?" I asked quietly. "Your accounts, your assets, people's trust, and even my trust?" Lena nodded. Mike was silent. I stepped over to the table and placed the envelope with the court decision in front of them. "Here. This isn't revenge. This is justice. You must return everything you obtained illegally. And you know what? This isn't the end. This is a lesson." Sarah Lawson had prepared all the papers in advance, and now they were signing the repayment agreement for the loan amount and compensation. I watched every movement without interfering. No shouting, no anger. Only calm and an inner certainty. The truth was on my side. After they signed, I said, "Dad is not your bank. And he's not your insurance policy against consequences." Mike looked up as if seeing me for the first time. We didn't think." He began, but I interrupted. "You thought I wouldn't notice. You thought a parent's love justifies everything. It doesn't." Lena cried quietly, Mike clenched his fists. I could see the scale of their mistake dawning on them. The tears, the fear, the shame, they were now experiencing everything I had felt for months. A day later they began returning the money. Not because I demanded it, but because the law and their own consciences were forcing them into line. And every transfer, every check, felt like a small drop of moral satisfaction. Not the sweetness of revenge, but the calm triumph of justice. I changed my habits. The phone was no longer a tool of pressure. The new number, the answering machine. If you're calling to borrow money, you've dialed the wrong number. Sometimes I heard calls from old friends, colleagues. Laughter. Conversations. Life went on. But the real ending happened unexpectedly. A few months later, Mike came to me with a piece of paper. He looked tired, defeated, and for the first time in his life he admitted, "Dad, I get it now. We lost more than money. We lost respect. And your trust." I remained silent. I didn't need to say anything. His words were the acknowledgement I had been waiting for. In that moment, I thought of Bill, of his quiet advice. Justice is better than any revenge. And now I understood he was right. That same day, I turned the answering machine on again just in case, to remind myself and them. If you think you can deceive me for your own gain, you've dialed the wrong number. Deep down, I felt no anger. I felt calm. That rare peace you feel when you know the truth has prevailed and you have remained true to yourself. A few days later, Mike tried to call again, this time to ask for a meeting. But now I only listened to, "Dad, can we talk?" and replied evenly, calmly, "Of course," but no money involved. He was silent, understanding that the game was over. Months passed. I started making tea in my old kitchen again, looking out at the garden, reading the newspaper. Sometimes I looked at old family photos, but now with a smile, not with pain. And in that moment, I understood that the greatest victory wasn't the money, nor the court's decision. The victory was in being the master of my own life again, in understanding that a parent's love can be unconditional, but it must never be blind. And you know what? No call, no plea, no tear will ever make me doubt myself again. Because now I know the price of respect. And whoever violates it will learn that lesson in their own way. And in that moment, I understood that the greatest victory wasn't the money, nor the court's decision. The victory was in being the master of my own life again, in understanding that a parent's love can be unconditional, but it must never be blind. And now I ask you, asterisk, what would you have done in my place? Would enduring the deception indefinitely truly be a testament to love, or merely to weakness? Is it revenge to demand basic respect, or is it the bare minimum one owes to oneself? Can love truly exist without boundaries, or does such love simply become a license for others to inflict pain? And finally, where does a parent's responsibility end and an adult child's accountability begin? These are the questions that remain. The answers, I've learned, are found not in grand gestures, but in the quiet dignity of upholding your own worth. And you know what? No call, no plea, no tear will ever make me doubt myself again. Because now I know the price of respect. And whoever violates it will learn that lesson in their own way.